Our guest today is Rick Seipp, Legislative and Advocacy Committee Chair for the Pennsylvania Pharmacists Association. In July, Governor Josh Shapiro signed a law updating regulations regarding pharmacy benefit managers. So first of all, for those unfamiliar, can you explain what is the role of pharmacy benefit managers?
Absolutely, and thank you for having me. Appreciate it. So it's a very important issue for our pharmacy community. So pharmacy benefit managers are essentially organizations that sit in between your health plan and your pharmacies to help process prescriptions. So as you go into a pharmacy to have a prescription filled and you have insurance, the pharmacies communicate with the pharmacy benefit managers, and they're the ones that come back and say how much the copay will be for a prescription, also how much a pharmacy is paid, et cetera, through the process. And they sit in between there really to help to facilitate the process.
So as you mentioned, pharmacy benefit managers are tasked with negotiating the prices between the pharmaceutical companies and the consumer. Could you explain, or is there anything currently in law prior to this legislation that just passed that requires that savings to be passed down to either the community pharmacies or the consumers themselves?
So that's a great question. So some of the last legislation was really back around 2016 from the prior legislation. And that legislation had a lot of very good intentions, but it was difficult to enforce the way that the laws were passed. So there were attempts at that, but it really didn't take effect the way that it was intended to back then. So that's what this law does. It has some substantial intentions to be able to do that, to have some regulations there, not only from the contracting side, but also to give oversight to the Pennsylvania Insurance Department, or PID. And the Insurance Department really will have oversight over what the PBMs are able to do and not able to do.
Is there anything specific that caught the attention of lawmakers that made them decide to revise the regulations regarding pharmacy benefit managers at this time?
Absolutely. I think that it was an outcry both from a pharmacy ownership perspective, but also from consumers. So both of those outcries kind of really came forward as almost a groundswell of concerns that there needed to be regulations and someone to step into the industry. Throughout the state, since the beginning of the year, really almost one community pharmacy, both independents and chains, and they're both impacted by this, very frankly, have closed. And we're well over 140 and probably approaching 160 pharmacies at this point in time in the year. And it's almost balanced. It's like about 60-40 between chains and independents that have closed. And a significant component to that is the reimbursement that pharmacies are receiving and being paid below cost. But the other side to this, too, is it's not just the businesses that are impacted, it's the patients, which is really the most important component of it, right? And your viewers of either not being able to go to a pharmacy that they would like to go to and have access to be able to go to any pharmacy they'd like to. But also then there's a lot of, I'll say, muddy water as far as for how much they have to pay for their prescriptions. Does it cost one amount at one pharmacy and a different amount at another? And is it more expensive underneath the insurance or through the PBM program versus as cash or through a discount card, and becomes very, very difficult to navigate that. And that's why the legislature needed to step in, and we appreciate them and Governor Shapiro for doing that.
How much of an influence historically have pharmacy benefit managers had on the drug market?
I'll say it's been increasing. Every year, every contract, it gets more and more. So there's a couple of factors that have come into play on that. So one of them is the vertical integration that you hear so much in the news and in the media about that, meaning that the PBMs have purchased either other health plans or consolidated. So it's to the point where 3 PBMs control over 80% of all the pharmacy claims that are in the country. So those 3 PBMs, a lot of their policies, their procedures, their costs really impact just a significant amount of Americans in the process. So that consolidation has really created, I'll say, an anti-competitive environment from that perspective, especially when dealing with the pharmacies, because they have a significant upper hand. And when they have contracts, because their contracts go both ways, they go down to the pharmacies and up to the drug manufacturers. So they can control some of the pricing and basically state what pricing they want from the manufacturers, and have a lot of almost too much power from that perspective, and also too much power the other way down going to the pharmacies, because if a pharmacy doesn't accept a contract or an agreement to allow a patient to come to them, then they don't get to see the patients. So then they're out of business, or they accept a contract that is really not beneficial and negative, to the point where if you purchase a drug for one amount but have to pay but get paid for below the amount that you purchased it, that's not a sustainable business model. And that's what's been happening. And every year with every contract, as I was kind of saying in the beginning of the answer to this question, it gets worse and worse from a reimbursement perspective, because the power is greater and greater, and it's kind of snowballed.
You had mentioned a moment ago somewhere between 140 and 160 pharmacies in Pennsylvania have closed over the last year. A recent report by WVIA in northeastern Pennsylvania noted 27% of Pennsylvanians also live in what's known as a pharmacy desert. What's the importance of having a community pharmacy that's accessible?
It's very important. So the pharmacist and a pharmacy, and I'll say beyond just a pharmacist, right? So you're very familiar with a pharmacy technician or a cashier that as you go in to pick up your medications, you see that person every day. You may see the pharmacist every other time or every time, depending upon how that pharmacy is staffed. So that pharmacist and pharmacy associate is the front line very often of healthcare. One, there's typically free advice that happens almost every time that you go in. It's very conversational, that you're able to get information that maybe you wouldn't be able to get to, or you're not able to make an appointment with your provider, with your physician, or whatever medical practitioner that you're going to go to otherwise. And there's been really a decrease in the amount of just general practitioners that are available in the area, and especially in those pharmacy deserts. In those pharmacy deserts, we typically think about them as in rural Pennsylvania, but that's not the case right now. It's not only rural Pennsylvania, but it's happening throughout the state and including in our cities. In Philadelphia, predominantly, there's been a number of pharmacies that have closed there, and honestly in the city of Pittsburgh as well too. Again, across the state, where you may think about it only being 5 miles or 3 miles, but in the city, 3 miles can be a tremendous task to be able to move from neighborhood to neighborhood to find a pharmacy where you can get your prescription needs, over-the-counter needs, or even immunizations as well too. So those are all things that you have much easier access than if you were trying to go to another provider.
Let's talk about some of the specifics of the new law. It includes new transparency requirements. Can you talk a little bit about those and why they're important to your constituency?
Sure, absolutely. And that transparency is important because, one, the insurance department has mandated reporting that they need to receive from PBMs. So down the road, as they receive that reporting, one is they'll be able to make sure that the rebates that PBMs receive flush back down to the health plan, which in a sense should impact the consumer and should have a lower healthcare cost for just the general public, whether it be through your benefits plan or how much you pay for your insurance, or your copays at the marketplace or in the pharmacy. In addition to that, there are network adequacy reporting as well too. And what that means in English to the general Pennsylvanian is the fact that you should be able to have a pharmacy in close proximity to you. And if there's not enough pharmacies in a network, then that's a concern for the insurance department and the legislature, which is why they put that out there. So those are really important components for that, and as well as payment equality. So if a PBM owns a pharmacy, so there's a very large PBM, I won't name them, that owns a number of pharmacies out in the state. They potentially, and studies have shown that they've paid their pharmacies greater than another community pharmacy, whether it be an independent or a chain. And this law requires them to pay all the pharmacies within the network the same amount, so that there's not one pharmacy that gets more money than another pharmacy. And that the way that they pay their pharmacies is actually required to be reported to the insurance department. So if they don't follow the law, and as that reporting goes into the insurance department can take action to make sure that it's fair.
The new law also attempts to limit pharmacy benefit managers from patient steering. Can you talk a little bit about that? And in particular, what kind of tactics have been used to influence where consumers get their medicines?
Absolutely. And that is a significant component. Once you get past all the other pieces, that patient steering, because Mrs. Smith or Mr. Jones may have a relationship with the pharmacy locally, and all of a sudden the plan may not be accepted or be eliminated from being able to accept the insurance. As a result of that, a pharmacy or a PBM may steer someone to go to another pharmacy, or can steer them, basically direct them to go to another pharmacy from a difference in a copay as well too. And that is also impacted on here as well. So if every prescription it costs you $10 instead of $5 for a copay, that really adds up, especially when you have a patient that has a lot of different disease states or just conditions that they need to get multiple prescriptions every month for. That really adds up. And from a steering perspective as well, there's been tactics where you don't even know it as a consumer or as a patient, but the PBM has moved your prescription or attempted to move your prescription to mail order or to one of their own pharmacies, and that's prevented in this process as well too in this bill.
The association that's representing the pharmacy benefit managers says that new transparency and pharmacy participation requirements could hurt their ability to negotiate for lower prices. What do you think of that assessment?
I would say from our perspective, that's not the case, and that this is about access and making sure that Pennsylvanians have access to healthcare. We've also seen where, as there's been consolidation and closures of pharmacies, it's impacted the quality and also the amount of care that can be given into an area as well too. So by allowing more pharmacies to stay open, one, your wait for prescriptions should go down as well, and the amount of time that a pharmacist or pharmacy associate can spend with you should be greater, and that's going to also impact secondary costs as well too. So if you don't get your prescription, or there's a pharmacy that's 20 miles away that you have to go to instead of around the corner, you're more apt to get your prescription filled and having that life-saving medication instead of a secondary impact of maybe somebody goes without their heart medication, they have a heart attack, et cetera. Those are all things that are probably really not taken into account there from their perspective, but I won't speak for them. But I think it's important, and I believe that it allows that fairness to be continued between different pharmacies.
The new law defines specialty drug. Can you explain very briefly what a specialty drug is and what concerns were tied to getting access to that?
Yeah, and this is a hot topic button for sure. So as more and more medications cost more money, and as we're able to make, and not me, but pharmaceutical manufacturers are able to develop and produce medications that are very specialized for certain treatments, those costs are typically pretty expensive. So a specialty medication, based in general terms, is typically a more expensive medication. It could be anywhere up to, it's actually defined in the bill as about $950 per month for a 30-day supply for a medication. And also typically it has special requirements. So special storage, or special counseling, special follow-up that needs to happen. What this bill does is it defines what's a specialty medication. What was happening is that PBMs were putting medications that could have been on the market for decades, frankly, and very low cost into a specialty network, or pushing insulins and other, I'll say, autoimmune medications that are readily available in all pharmacies to a specialty status. So you had to get it through mail order, or you had to go to a very specific pharmacy for it. And this bill prevents that from happening. It allows you to continue to get these medications locally. And if it is a specialized product, obviously there are some guidelines for that as well. But it allows you to be able to stay locally at your pharmacy, not have the PBM move that medication to another tier, to eliminate it out of your benefit, and allow you to continue to get it locally at your pharmacy.
Can you talk a little bit more about what this law does to address concerns, making sure that consumers have access to participating pharmacies within a reasonable distance?
Absolutely. And that's part of that network adequacy requirement. And really, the CMS, which is a federal organization with Medicare Part D, has requirements that you have to be able to have a pharmacy within a very reasonable distance from your home. And what this law does in addition to that, to having that network adequacy, is it makes sure that you have a pharmacy within a reasonable distance for you to get to. So help to prevent the creation of those pharmacy deserts, because those pharmacy deserts can be created one of two ways. One is a pharmacy closes and then you don't have any pharmacies there, or a pharmacy could be eliminated from a network. So even though the pharmacy is set up right down the street from you, you could potentially not be able to go to it. So this would require a PBM to make sure that they have enough pharmacies in their network that are close to your house and where you live. It also requires for the PBM affiliated pharmacy. So if a PBM owns a pharmacy, that pharmacy doesn't count towards that overall number and that requirement. So that's a really important component to this as well.
Does this new law do anything to reconcile what it actually costs a consumer to purchase a drug versus what it costs for the pharmacy to stock and dispense that medicine?
Right now, there's studies that are coming for that, but at this point, the bill doesn't approach that yet. But I will say that if there are items that are egregious, the insurance department is set up now to take complaints, whether it be from a consumer or from a pharmacy, and we'll be able to report some of those concerns that are there. Now, there are items as far as within the bill that if you are able to, as a consumer, or a patient, be able to purchase something cheaper as cash or without insurance, a pharmacist or a pharmacy associate is required to make sure that they let you know that. Now, it's obviously a patient's choice, right? If a patient still wants, for whatever reason, to have it underneath their insurance, they can still do that. But that requirement is there pharmacies have done it for a really long time. This is just kind of put something into play that is just really a best practice.
Earlier this summer at a Senate Appropriations Committee hearing, Senator Scott Martin had noted that it'll cost the Pennsylvania Insurance Department roughly $2 million for enforcement of these new pharmacy benefit manager regulations. Can you give any insight into how that's going to be funded?
Yes, so they've changed a couple of different things. So the registration process was pretty inexpensive for the PBMs. The PBMs sit in the top 10 of the most profitable companies in the country, frankly. So the registration fee for them and for auditing entities, which they also audit pharmacies pretty regularly as well, was really around $1,000. And we're talking in the tens of millions, hundreds of millions that these organizations make, plus even into the billions, some of them. So that was increased to $10,000 for each auditing entity and also for each PBM. There's also a contracting group, which is called PSAOs. They're now there's a limited number of them, but there's also a registration fee there, as well as fines that the insurance department can levy. Those fines, as well as the registration fees, come together to help to fund that. And I would expect that funding should come very much so just from within the industry. And I wouldn't expect, this is just me as a casual observer and as a citizen, I wouldn't expect that to come out of the taxpayers' money, that would come out through the whole process, what was handled within the bill.
When will this new law begin to take effect?
So it's gradual. So the bill essentially takes into effect, there are some components around immunizations, things like that. We haven't talked to that yet. That is a takeoff from the PrEP Act, and some of those provisions are in effect, but this actually allows to make sure there's no lapse. Those provisions come into effect around 120 days, so around the middle of November. Some of the contract changes that are there and that are in place and reporting anywhere between 120 days or when the next contract is negotiated. So if there's an amendment or change to the agreement, that's when they take effect as well too. So in the Commonwealth, it's illegal for a current contract to be changed from a law that's out there. So as the old contracts expire, then they take effect. So
what approach will the association you represent take in terms of determining how effective this new law is moving forward?
I think a number of different areas. Probably the first one from the effectiveness is, how do our patients seem? How is their health? How are their outcomes? Their availability to get access to a pharmacy. I think that's probably one of the most important components. We all take an oath, similar to physicians, but from a pharmacist's perspective, we do as well too. So we want to make sure that the general public really is able to get the medication that they need, able to get it reasonably. And frankly, from a secondary perspective, is we're trying to make sure that the pharmacies stop closing, and that it's reasonable, that reimbursement is reasonable, that there's more transparency through the process, and that if someone's not being treated fairly, that there's a process and a way to be able to make sure that that's properly, I'll say, adjudicated, right? So that someone can be treated the right way. So I think a combination of all those components would probably be a good yardstick for that.
Have other states experienced similar concerns regarding the impact of pharmacy benefit managers on drug pricing?
I'm smiling, and I apologize because it is I'll say, as they said at House Oversight Committee hearing federally I believe it was last week. They said there's very few things that come together from a bipartisan perspective, and this is one of them. So I will say not only federally, but in the states across the country, this is exactly legislation. Every state has its own little nuances and twists. But New Jersey just passed legislation. Vermont has. Ohio did previously. It's all throughout the country. This is definitely a hot topic button to make sure that patient access is preserved. The cost of medications don't continue to increase, both from a consumer and a healthcare and a health plan perspective, and to make sure that we maintain access to pharmacies. Pharmacies closing is particular an issue in Pennsylvania, but it's also issues across the state, across the country as well too.
Is there anything that you'd like to see that wasn't addressed in the law that just passed that perhaps may be next steps for advocacy?
Yeah, and I thank you. That's a really important question too, because it's not only, as you said before, it's in fairness to make sure that, okay, what was passed, did it work? Right? That's the first piece. And I think that there has been such an outcry that we want to make sure that, one, that the law was passed and finished, which it was, but then also, was it effective, and then what's those next steps? And I think it has to do with the department's study, frankly, and there are certain components that the study is going to look at that the insurance department has to run, which is looking at patient costs, pharmacy reimbursement, and making sure that access is preserved. And then there's some components in there that's looking at a process that's called spread, which means that the pharmacy is reimbursed a lower amount than what a health plan is charged from the PBM. So a pharmacy could be reimbursed $2 and a health plan could be charged absorbent amounts of money for the same medication. It's not always the case, in fairness to them, but in many cases it's substantial, and talk about that in different hearings. But I think that the results of that study will help to lead us to the next legislation. And I think the legislature and Pennsylvanians should be very curious about what that looks like and what those results are, and what should be those next steps. And I think that'll be kind of the guiding hand. And I think that there was some really good I'll say temperance to make sure that we didn't go too far with the legislation without getting to a point where we were being over prescriptive in the legislation without having enough information. So it was a good balancing act, as a good first step, but we know that there's more to come.
What do you anticipate this newly passed law will mean both for community pharmacies as well as consumers?
Again, take consumers first. I think hopefully, one, we hope see a slowdown in the closing of pharmacies. So that automatically should mean more access. I think you should see more access just in general from the network adequacy requirements and the less steering. So you can still go and see your favorite pharmacist, wherever that favorite pharmacist is, or whatever pharmacy he or she works for, right? I think that those are probably some of the most important components. The ability to continue to get some of the immunizations, especially as we're coming into the fall. It's a really important time to protect yourself. Make sure that you get vaccines that you need to appropriately. And from a pharmacy perspective, I'd hope to see obviously more stay open and having that added transparency and being able to offer even more services to the general public.
We've been speaking with Rick Seipp, Legislative and Advocacy Committee Chair for the Pennsylvania Pharmacists Association. Thank you for speaking with us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.